Yes, I know. Technically, it's Christmas Eve, but the title was too good to pass up. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Owen's mom put the book down and leaned in to give him a kiss on the cheek. He played at pulling away, but it wasn't long before he let her win. "There you are, my little man," she said, looking over to Dad at the other end of the room. "And you know what time it is?" Owen frowned a little as he looked across the room. Usually Dad was over listening to Mom reading the story, but tonight he was looking at the screen that had been turned down low. Owen grinned. He knew just what to do to make everything better. "I'm not going to bed," he loudly proclaimed to the room. "I'm staying up to see Santa." "Oh, no, you don't, mister," Mom said, smiling. "You're going to bed or else." "Or else what?" he said, jutting his chin out. He knew the answer, but that wouldn't stop him from asking. It was as much a part of their Christmas tradition as setting out cookies and milk for Santa. "Because Santa doesn't visit naughty children who stay up past their bedtime," Mom said, wagging a finger at him. "Especially not on Christmas Eve." Owen stuck his tongue out and looked over to Dad again. He expected him to get in on the fun, but he still stood there staring at the screen with a slightly worried frown on his face. He hadn't even turned on the Yule log like in years past. That was part of the tradition, too. Owen always loved how the colors from the screen played against the tinsel thrown up around it. Owen frowned. He couldn't hear what they were saying on the screen, but he could tell what was up there. "Is that like one of the maps from your army days, Dad?" he asked. Dad started and turned, as though realizing for the first time that he had an audience. He tried to smile, but it wasn't quite there. That worried Owen for some reason he couldn't put his finger on. "That?" he asked, chuckling. "That's just the TDF tracking Santa tonight to make sure he doesn't run into any trouble." Owen stared at the screen. He recognized some of the surrounding area, but he wasn't sure what the people on the screen were talking about. Something about losing contact with Centauri Base or something. "Didn't you stay at Centauri Base once?" he asked, trying to make sense of the map. "I did, son," his dad said, walking over to ruffle his hair. "A long time ago. But you know what they say. Once you're TDF, you're always TDF." "Yeah," Owen said, grinning at the ruffled hair. Then he got serious as he looked at the map. If that really was the Terran Defense Force tracking Santa, "Are you sure he's going to come tonight?" Owen asked. "I don't think we have anything to worry about," his dad said, talking almost to himself. "It could just mean one of the fold space relays is down, and it is 4 light years away for all they try to pretend that's nothing these days, and—" His dad trailed off with a grunt as Mom elbowed him in the side. Dad snapped out of whatever it was he was saying, looked at the screen, then down to Owen. "Santa, right?" he said. "I'm sure Santa's going to be here right on time tonight. And he'll only be right on time if certain little boys are in their bed on time," his mom said, grabbing him from behind and tickling him. Owen laughed and tried to break free, but Mom was good about keeping him in place when she wanted to. Normally he'd be too old for that sort of thing. He was almost in 3rd year after all, but he let her do it. It was Christmas Eve after all, though thoughts of Santa brought back other memories. Owen looked out the back windows to the snow-covered field. Their house had been a farmhouse once upon a time, but there was no need for that now. His dad said programmers did most of the farming these days, though there was no glow from the farming units at this time of year. Not when snow blanketed the fields. His mom and dad seemed happy about that. Something about carbon scrubbers doing their work. He wasn't worried about snow or carbon scrubbers, though. "Do you think Santa will be able to do something about the monsters?" he asked. "Honey, we've been over this before," Mom said, getting down on her knees in front of him and putting her hands on his shoulders. "There are no monsters out there." Owen didn't look at his mom, though. No, he looked to Dad, who stood there staring out the back windows with that same look. Like something bothered him, but he didn't want to look like something bothered him. Then he shook his head and looked down, realizing Owen was looking at him. "Your mom's right, kid," he said, ruffling Owen's hair again. "There's no such thing as monsters." "That's right," Mom said. "Of course it's only natural for you to be a little afraid," Dad went on. Why when I was a kid I was terrified that a were-what? He cut off again at another elbow from Mom, though this one went into his thigh. He blushed and glanced to the screen, then back to Owen. Your mom's right, son, he said. There's no such thing as monsters, and there's nothing you need to be worrying about. Only Owen had seen that look. Dad was looking out the back windows, out where Owen had seen the monsters at night, and he didn't believe anything he said about monsters not being real. Owen had seen the way he got out his old TDF pulse rifle and put new charges on every night. He figured adults didn't do that if they thought monsters were make-believe, not that he'd said anything to either Mom or Dad about it. He'd seen the dangerous looks they gave him, and he knew when to keep his mouth shut. Still, he looked at the screen, at the stories about Centauri Base going silent. He thought about the worried looks from his dad who put in time in the TDF when it was first starting up. He always thought his dad knew more about what was going on in the world than he let on. Could the monsters be aliens? Dad and Mom both shared looks at that. Looks that told Owen there was more going on here than they let on. Usually that meant they were going to stay up after they sent him to bed, something they always said was boring. Now, though, it sent a shiver running through him. Owen, your dad's been to Centauri Base and back. That's farther than most humans have ever traveled, and I never saw an alien in all that time, Dad said, putting a hand on his shoulder and giving it a squeeze. There aren't any monsters out there, and you don't need to worry about aliens. Owen frowned. He still had that feeling, but if Dad said it was going to be okay, then he figured it was going to be okay. It's not like his parents would lie to him. Come on, Owen, Mom said. Time for you to get up to bed. I'll race you, he said. He figured once he'd given up on staying up to see Santa, he might as well get up to bed as soon as possible. The sooner he went to sleep, the sooner he'd wake up in the morning and see all the presents waiting. He threw himself into bed and pulled the covers up. He was already in his pajamas. His mom came into the room. She looked out the window and he followed her gaze. They were out in the countryside next to an old highway that his parents said used to have a bunch of traffic back when people rode around on wheels, but not so much anymore when anyone could. Call in a hover transport. Not that there was ever much of a line of those going into town in the distance, and even less tonight. Probably because nobody wanted to risk hitting Santa and his reindeer. You going to be okay up here? His mom asked, sitting down on his bed. I'll be fine, Mom, he said. I'm 9, you know. I know, she said, moving some hair out from in front of his eyes. Believe me, I know. You're turning into my big little man, aren't you? Come on, Mom, he said, rolling his eyes. You have a good sleep, she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. He let her do it. He figured it was Christmas Eve, after all. Mom, he said, then stopped. He thought about what he'd heard at school before break. Kids talking about Santa, saying things that made sense, even if he didn't want to believe them. What's up? She asked. He thought about asking her. He knew she'd tell the truth. His parents wouldn't ever keep the truth from him. Only he couldn't bring himself to ask. Are you sure Santa's going to come tonight? He asked. There. That was safe enough. He wasn't asking, but he was asking, if that made sense. She smiled as she stood and moved over to the door, her hand hovering on the old-fashioned switch. He'd been to friends' houses where the house could sense when it was time for the lights to go off, but this old farmhouse his dad grew up in didn't have anything fancy like that. I'm positive, she said. He'll come. He always does, doesn't he? Yeah, Owen said, feeling more confident. Those kids at school could pound sand. Santa was real. His mom wouldn't say Santa was coming if he wasn't real. You going to be okay in here? She asked. No more talk of monsters? Her eyes darted to the window. He had a view of the old highway leading to town, and the glow in the distance where people were no doubt getting ready to celebrate Christmas. There was also a bright, full moon overhead that illuminated the snow. He hesitated. What if they were lying about Santa? If they lied about Santa, then they could lie about monsters not being real too. He pushed those thoughts away. His parents told him the truth. I'll be fine, he said. He liked it when there was a full moon and he really liked the snow. He could see anything out there. The monsters wouldn't be shadows if they tried to sneak up on them tonight. "Good night, Owen," Mom said. "I'll see you in the morning." "Love you, Mom," he said. "Love you too." And with that, she was gone. He waited for her to go down the stairs, then he turned to look out the wide old windows. A lattice of iron cast shadows over his bed from the full moon. He wondered if he'd be able to see Santa on his sleigh as he came in for a landing. The windows in his room were pretty big, and he put a hand over his eyes as the sky got bright. The shadows from the moon turned to daylight, and the snow out in front of the house was almost blinding. He looked up into the sky, and his breath caught. He'd heard stories about the star and the three wise men, but he'd always thought they were stories. Only there, hanging in the sky like a blinding jewel, was a star brighter than anything he'd ever seen. He knew it hadn't been there before. "Mom! Dad! It's the Christmas star! It's here!" He didn't know why the Christmas star would be here when all that stuff had supposedly happened thousands of years ago, but he also didn't question. It was Christmas Eve. There was a star as bright as the day hanging over their town, and that meant it had to be the Christmas star. Only something weird happened. He could see lights twinkling from the town in the distance. Their house was on a slight rise that looked down on the lights below. Those lights were off now, though. The faint rosy glow that always hung in the sky was gone. There were a few lights still on down there, sure, but not nearly as many as before. Owen should know. He'd spent most of his young life looking down at those lights in the distance after dark when he couldn't get to sleep right away. "What's going on?" he heard his mom shout from below. "Hold on, I'm going to get it," his dad said. "Do you really need to get that thing?" she asked. Her voice was cut off as a loud tone came from the screen down below. Owen frowned. Usually that only came when there was a bad storm in the spring, but it was the middle of winter, and there definitely wasn't a thunderstorm out there now. No, everything was peaceful, quiet, serene, especially with only a few lights. On in the town below, another light appeared, but it was up in the sky. Pure joy seized at Owen as he looked up, but then he realized there was something off about it. The light moved along one of the flight paths the hover transports used, but it was moving down towards the ground. Fast. "I think I see Santa," he shouted down, though he wasn't sure even as he said it. That light kept moving down towards town, but it was going fast. It also seemed too early for Santa. Everyone knew he came in the middle of the night. The line of light slammed into the town, and there was a huge explosion. Owen gasped, his eyes going wide. That couldn't be Santa. He wouldn't crash like that. But if it wasn't Santa, what about the people riding in it? Hover transports were supposed to be safe. More lights filled the sky. Only they weren't on the hover transport track either. No, they came down from the skies above. He looked up and saw streaks like when his dad kept him up to watch a meteor shower last summer, only these were much brighter. And they didn't go away like the meteors no, they kept streaking through the sky in long lines. He watched, wondering if these were more hover transports crashing, but they slowed as they got closer to the ground. Some of them moved down over the town as well. Owen frowned. He turned, and was about to go ask his dad what was going on when he appeared, carrying his TDF pulse rifle. The rifle's tip glowed, and it let out an ominous hum that let him know it was ready to be fired. "Dad?" he asked. "We're going to shoot the pulse rifle this late at night?" He didn't mind shooting his dad's pulse rifle this late at night. Technically, he wasn't supposed to, but his dad always smiled and said he figured the TDF wouldn't mind the next generation of Earth's defenders getting in some early training. Only there was something wrong now. Dad looked worried. Not to mention Mom would never let them go out to shoot that thing in the middle of the night, so why did he have his pulse rifle out now? "Get away from the window, Owen," he said. "But I thought I saw Santa, only there. Are a lot of lights coming down?" he said. "Why? What's—" Owen turned to look out the window, and his breath caught. The light up in the sky was still bright enough to see by, and he could see they were back. The monsters. He hesitated. What if they were lying about Santa? If they lied about Santa, then they could lie about monsters not being real too. He pushed those thoughts away. His parents told him the truth. "I'll be fine," he said. He liked it when there was a full moon and he really liked the snow. He could see anything out there. The monsters wouldn't be shadows if they tried to sneak up on them tonight. "Good night, Owen," Mom said. "I'll see you in the morning." "Love you, Mom," he said. "Love you too." And with that, she was gone. He waited for her to go down the stairs, then he turned to look out the wide old windows. A lattice of iron cast shadows over his bed from the full moon. He wondered if he'd be able to see Santa on his sleigh as he came in for a landing. The windows in his room were pretty big, and he put a hand over his eyes as the sky got bright. The shadows from the moon turned to daylight, and the snow out in front of the house was almost blinding. He looked up into the sky, and his breath caught. He'd heard stories about the star and the three wise men, but he'd always thought they were stories. Only there, hanging in the sky like a blinding jewel, was a star brighter than anything he'd ever seen. He knew it hadn't been there before. "Mom! Dad! It's the Christmas star! It's here!" He didn't know why the Christmas star would be here when all that stuff had supposedly happened thousands of years ago, but he also didn't question. It was Christmas Eve. There was a star as bright as the day hanging over their town, and that meant it had to be the Christmas star. Only something weird happened. He could see lights twinkling from the town in the distance. Their house was on a slight rise that looked down on the lights below. Those lights were off now, though. The faint rosy glow that always hung in the sky was gone. There were a few lights still on down there, sure, but not nearly as many as before. Owen should know. He'd spent most of his young life looking down at those lights in the distance after dark when he couldn't get to sleep right away. "What's going on?" he heard his mom shout from below. "Hold on, I'm going to get it," his dad said. "Do you really need to get that thing?" she asked. Her voice was cut off as a loud tone came from the screen down below. Owen frowned. Usually that only came when there was a bad storm in the spring, but it was the middle of winter, and there definitely wasn't a thunderstorm out there now. No, everything was peaceful, quiet, serene, especially with only a few lights. On in the town below, another light appeared, but it was up in the sky. Pure joy seized at Owen as he looked up, but then he realized there was something off about it. The light moved along one of the flight paths the hover transports used, but it was moving down towards the ground. Fast. "I think I see Santa," he shouted down, though he wasn't sure even as he said it. That light kept moving down towards town, but it was going fast. It also seemed too early for Santa. Everyone knew he came in the middle of the night. The line of light slammed into the town, and there was a huge explosion. Owen gasped, his eyes going wide. That couldn't be Santa. He wouldn't crash like that. But if it wasn't Santa, what about the people riding in it? Hover transports were supposed to be safe. More lights filled the sky. Only they weren't on the hover transport track either. No, they came down from the skies above. He looked up and saw streaks like when his dad kept him up to watch a meteor shower last summer, only these were much brighter. And they didn't go away like the meteors had. No, they kept streaking through the sky in long lines. He watched, wondering if these were more hover transports crashing, but they slowed as they got closer to the ground. Some of them moved down over the town as well. Owen frowned. He turned and was about to go ask his dad what was going on when he appeared, carrying his TDF pulse rifle. The rifle's tip glowed, and it let out an ominous hum that let him know it was ready to be fired. "Dad?" he asked. "We're going to shoot the pulse rifle this late at night?" He didn't mind shooting his dad's pulse rifle this late at night. Technically, he wasn't supposed to, but his dad always smiled and said he figured the TDF wouldn't mind the next generation of Earth's defenders getting in some early training. Only there was something wrong now. Dad looked worried. Not to mention Mom would never let them go out to shoot that thing in the middle of the night, so why did he have his pulse rifle out now? "Get away from the window, Owen," he said. "But I thought I saw Santa, only there are a lot of lights coming down," he said. "Why? What's—" Owen turned to look out the window, and his breath caught. The light up in the sky was still bright enough to see by, and he could see they were back. The monsters. Only now they were moving out across the snow, towards the house. They weren't staying at the edge of a small woods off in the distance that sat at the boundary of one of the fields. Dad. The monsters looked weird. They looked big. They walked on two legs, moving confidently, and left weird prints in the snow behind them. "Owen, I said get down," Dad shouted. Owen flinched at the yelling. His dad never raised his voice. That was almost more terrifying than the creatures out there. Some of the monsters pointed at their house. Something glowed in their hands, or what he figured was their hands. A hand grabbed his shoulder and he cried out in terror. It wasn't the monsters. It was his dad pulling him back. A moment later, the world ended around him. Owen blinked a couple of times. His ears rang. He looked up to see holes in his window, and the iron grating holding the big window panes in place were bent inwards. He looked around and coughed in the dust. Then he looked to see his dad on the ground, a couple of cauterized wounds from pulse rifle plasma still smoking. "No," he said, crawling over to his dad. He didn't dare get up to walk to him, not with those monsters out there able to hit them from this distance. When he got to his dad, his eyes were closed. He tried feeling for a pulse like they'd taught him. He wasn't sure if it was that he hadn't done this other than the time his dad showed him what to do, or if... No. He wouldn't think like that. Light filled the room again. He looked up to see spherical energy bolts slam into his room. They hit a poster featuring a TDF planetary defense platform, reducing it to ash. He screamed, then noticed something. His dad's pulse rifle. He shivered as he crawled over to the thing and ran his hands over it. Firing it with his dad had always been so much more fun than using boring old bullets. Now he thought about using it against the monsters. His grip firmed as he got ready to give as good as they were getting, damn it. "Owen? Greg!" His mom came into the room, but she was standing. Owen looked to the pulse rifle and to his mom. He knew what he had to do. More energy bolts sizzled into the room, but he'd already slammed into his mom. She might still be stronger than him, but he hit her with enough force that it knocked her down as the energy bolts moved through the air where she'd been standing. "Owen, what happened?" she asked. "The monsters," he said. "They shot Dad." Mom's face went blank for a moment as she looked into his room, and that same familiar terror wormed its way through his body. What if his mom gave up? Dad had told stories about people he knew who did that in training. People who'd fought in some of the old wars when it was still humans fighting each other. Back before the TDF. His mom blinked. She looked at him, and he knew she was back. He saw a look there that he'd only ever seen when he'd done something wrong, and he wondered if he was about to get in trouble for touching Dad's pulse rifle. "Stay right here," she hissed. "Okay," he said. His eyes wide, she crawled into his room. He almost called out to tell her to stop. Almost, but he worried that calling out would somehow let the monsters know where he was. Clearly they knew he was in here, but maybe they didn't know exactly where he was. More energy bolts sizzled through the air outside. Owen thought he heard some strange language that didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. It was low, guttural, cruel. The voices terrified him, but he also felt a small measure of satisfaction. He'd been right. There were monsters out there. It wasn't just his imagination. Maybe if someone had listened to him then... His eyes fell on his dad, and hot tears burned in his eyes. He wouldn't think about that. Not now. "Come on," his mom hissed, crawling back out of the room with Dad's pulse rifle cradled in one arm. "We need to get out of here. Get to the basement and hide until this is over." "Yeah, until this is over," Owen said. Though, there was a small voice in the back of his head telling him this wasn't going to go away just because they went hiding in the basement. No, he heard those things out there, and he didn't think they'd give up that easily. "What about Dad?" he asked. His mom paused and looked over her shoulder. Her eyes glistened, and with a shock he realized she was crying. He'd only ever seen that from her once before when his grandpa, her dad, died. He didn't like seeing those tears there now. "We need to get to the basement," she said. "We'll worry about everything else then." "Right," he said. "Now get up," she said, getting up to a crouch but keeping down. "But we don't have time for this, kiddo," she growled, scooping him up with a surprising strength in one arm and holding the pulse rifle out like it was a pistol in the other. Owen's eyes went wide. He knew how heavy that thing was. He hadn't thought his mom could lift it, but she took the steps 2 at a time going down to the first floor and held the pulse rifle like it didn't weigh anything. They reached the bottom of the stairs and his mom looped around. It was only a few steps to the basement. Owen didn't like the basement. It was all damp and musty and filled with a bunch of stuff that went back to when his great-grandpa owned this place, but he figured damp and musty and a little scary was okay when there were real monsters out there. An explosion shattered the back door to the house. Owen screamed as his mom raised the pulse rifle, and he saw one of the monsters standing right there in the kitchen. "It's one of the monsters," he shouted, fear causing him to cling to his mom. She fired off a couple of shots, and he heard shouts of pain in that same guttural language as earlier. His ears rang from the shots going off so close inside the house, but again he figured it was better than a monster chasing him. The front door exploded. Owen screamed, but his mom kept running for it. "The monsters!" he shouted, knowing that somehow she didn't understand. One of those things would be waiting, and they were through the door. He looked at the glowing tip of the pulse rifle. She'd used it to blow out the front door, and there was a big hole where that front had been. "We need to get out of here," Mom said. "That pulse took out the electronics, but there are still a few ancient wheeled gas guzzlers in the garage. That should work fine." Owen's breath caught. Gas guzzlers. That's what she called the old cars in the detached garage. Dad liked working on those sometimes. Said it was a fun hobby. He didn't know what she meant about a pulse, though. The pulse rifle was right there. Why would she shoot one of the cars they might use to escape anyway? "Keep your head against my shoulder, Owen," she said. But he didn't. He couldn't. He needed to see if there were any monsters chasing them, but then he looked up and his mouth fell open. "Mom! Christmas lights!" He felt her glance up. He knew she saw the same thing he did. Dancing green and red lights in the skies far above. Lights moving back and forth. Streaks like shooting stars. Blooming light as some of those green and red lights dancing in the skies hit home. "Those aren't Christmas lights, Owen," she said, her voice grim. "And we need to get out of here. We need to get help in town." "In town," he said, looking down. Owen's breath caught again, because he could see the town. Partly because of the full moon, partly because that Christmas star still lit everything, but mostly because of the massive twinkling ship hovering over the town. It didn't look like any Terran Defense Force ship he'd ever seen, and he had a poster in his room that had outlines of everything, lines streaked down from that ship. Sometimes they slowed before hitting, and other times they landed with a bright flash of light as parts of the town went up. A moment later, the sound from those explosions reached them. "There's a ship over the town," he said. His mom stopped. "Turned!" She gasped. "What the—" An explosion came from the detached garage. His mom cried out and Owen fell to the ground, landing hard on his shoulder with a cry of his own. He looked up, panic seizing him, and saw one of the creatures stepping out of the detached garage. Glowing hulks of metal waited in there. His dad's toys. Those old wheel cars that might have let them escape. The monster had used its weapon to reduce them to melted puddles of glowing metal. The thing spoke a few words in that cruel, guttural language. His mom whimpered next to him. Owen looked to her and blinked. No, not his mom, too. A massive splinter of wood that looked like the kind of thing vampire hunters used on the screen stuck out of her thigh. She tried to move, then cried out as her leg gave way. Owen looked up at the monster, his eyes wide. The thing was horrifying. It had 2 massive legs that seemed like tree trunks and boots that sank into the snow. It had wide shoulders and stood at least half again as tall as the tallest man Owen had ever seen. The thing had cruel clawed hands that held a rifle twice the size of the pulse rifle. And as it looked down at them, its helmet pulled back, revealing a face that looked like a slightly flattened crocodile, or maybe a slightly elongated hairless wolf with rows of sharp teeth that gleamed in the combined moonlight and starlight. Its eyes were empty black that reflected the many surrounding light shows. No pupils. At least not that he could see in the dark. The thing was truly a monster out of his worst nightmares. Owen wanted to scream, but couldn't. He scrambled back, but something stopped him. They'd come to rest against the house just under his window. He could see the old highway on the other side of the creature, but of course no one used that thing anymore. Owen pressed up against the house. The pulse rifle was still in his mom's hand. She hadn't let go even with the explosion. She tried to raise it, but the monster raised its own weapon and grinned with that mouthful of cruel teeth. The weapon didn't look like anything Owen had ever seen, but he'd known enough rifles to know what he was looking at even if it hadn't been made on Earth. The tip glowed, and the thing barked out more words in that language. "Keep still, Owen," his mom said quietly. "It's going to be okay." She lowered the rifle. The thing made an odd sort of repetitive coughing noise, and he thought it was laughing, though he couldn't be sure if that laugh was because she lowered the weapon or because she told him everything is going to be okay. "It is going to be okay," Owen said. "Bad things don't happen on Christmas." "Of course they don't." "Honey," his mom said, her voice sounding weak. She tried to wrap an arm around him. "Come here. Let me hold you. I promise you don't have to worry for long." The tip on the monster's rifle glowed brighter, and Owen realized what would happen if he gave his mom that hug. Something snapped inside him. He wouldn't let that happen. He wasn't going to let this thing kill his family. Not all of them. He dove for the pulse rifle and brought it up, pointing it at the monster. He lined up the sights, just like his dad taught him, and exhaled as he pulled the trigger. The shots landed right at the thing's center of mass, and its shot went wide. Energy bolts slammed into the house behind them, and wood splintered and rained down around them, but the blast didn't hit his mom. The thing took a couple of stumbling steps back under the force of impact, barking out a few short words in that cruel language. The thing had some sort of armor that absorbed the shot. Then it made that laughing sound again and pointed its weapon at Owen. "Owen, no!" his mom cried out. Owen closed his eyes. This was it. The thing had armor that could hold off pulse rifle shots. How could he fight against that? And there were more of the monsters, not to mention that ship over their town in the distance. There was no help coming. There was a loud, wet sound ripped through the otherwise silent night. The monster grunted, and it sounded surprised. Owen opened one eye and gasped. The monster had a long white point coming out of its midsection. Something had run straight through it. The point was white at the tip, but as it ran back, it turned to a swirling red and white pattern, exactly like what a candy cane looked like when he'd licked it until the tip became sharp enough to poke at his tongue. Only this thing was sharp enough to push through the monster's armor. The thing looked down, that face full of cruel teeth staring with wide, empty gray eyes, and it looked surprised. The monster tried to say something, but all that came out was an odd, glowing blue liquid. Then the white spear point pulled back, and the monster fell to its knees with a thud that sent sticky, cold, wet snow flying. Owen stared at the thing behind the monster. He couldn't believe it. "He did come," Owen whispered, for standing behind. The monster was a jolly old man with a long, flowing white beard, red coat and hat fringed with white, and a belly that shook like a bowl full of jelly as he brought his spear around and took off the monster's head with one swipe. Owen stared up at the jolly old elf, but there was nothing jolly about him as he stood there with a grim look. Owen felt he was looking at something ancient and terrible in that moment, a force that no monster could hope to reckon with. Something that went deep into his bones and touched parts of his mind that hadn't been touched since ancient man still looked into the night and knew there were terrors greater than his tools, and fire lurking in that darkness. Then it was gone. Owen blinked, and the man standing before him smiled as he leaned down and offered a hand. "Owen, right?" he said. Owen hesitated. Santa dug into his pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in red and green foil with a purple bow on top. He held it out to Owen. Owen eyed the box for a moment, wondering if this was another trick. Then he reached out and snatched it from Santa's hand. "Don't worry, you'll like this present," he said, handing another one to Owen's mom, with a wink of his eye and a twist of his head. She stared up at Santa in disbelief. Her mouth worked, but then she took the box and opened it. Owen's eyes went wide when he saw the contents. A TDF nanomed disc. His mom stared at it for a long moment, then hissed as she put it down over her leg. A small display lit up on the disk as it assessed the damage, and a percentage appeared as it went to work. She hissed even louder as the tiny machines in the disk entered her body. Owen knew how it worked. His dad told him all about it, even if he'd never seen it happen in person. The machines moved through his mom's body, fixing her, and as they did, the wood splinter in her leg was pushed out. "I thought you might like that present," Santa said, laughing. "What's happening?" Owen asked. "Invasion," Santa said, looking grim as he stared at the town and the ship hovering over it. "Invasion?" Owen said. Then it was aliens. He didn't know if he should be excited or terrified. His dad always wondered if humanity was alone in the universe. Always talked about meeting an alien. Tonight he got his wish, and Owen tried not to think about what happened when his dad finally got his wish. "What do we do?" Owen asked. "Will the TDF fight them?" Santa looked back down to Owen and smiled, putting a finger to his nose. "Oh yes, the TDF will fight. Them. The TDF and other things on this world. Old power and terror long thought to be lost in the shadows of time. Aren't you going to open your present, Owen? You were very good tonight, defending your mother." "I'd hate for you to miss your present," Santa said. "My present," Owen said, looking down at the gift. It seemed silly to worry about something like presents on a night like tonight, but he pulled at the wrapping paper and opened the box, revealing a second TDF nanomed disc. Owen frowned. "But I'm not hurt," he said. "You aren't, but someone in that house is," Santa said. Owen looked back to the house, up to where his room would be if the place hadn't been blown to smithereens. "You mean—" "Hurry," Santa said. "Owen, wait," his mom said, but he didn't care. He was already up and running around the house. He moved through the gaping, jagged hole that had been their front door and for the stairs. Only there was already something waiting for him there. He skidded to a halt in the hallway as he saw the monster moving up the stairs. They were sturdy wood that had stood for generations, but they buckled under the monster's weight. The thing paused, and its helmet tracked around. Owen stood there, terrified and unable to move. He knew if he didn't get to his dad with the disc, then he'd die. But if he stayed, then... The monster saw him. It whirled around, digging a clawed and armored hand into the wood next to the stairs as it reached out with another clawed hand. Owen saw movement behind the thing. Something small flew through the air and landed on it. The monster stood in obvious surprise as more small creatures came up from around its feet. They swarmed over the thing, digging at its armor with tiny tools as it flailed around, trying in vain to get rid of its attackers. Owen knew he had to move fast, so he ducked under a clawed arm as the alien flailed and moved up the stairs. And not a moment too soon, as the thing fell and went crashing through the stairs and down into the basement below, its screams echoing as the elves continued attacking it with their tools. The inhuman scream stopped by the time Owen reached the top of the stairs. He ran to his room, slapping the disc down on his dad. It blinked to life, and he held his breath as he watched the disc. It lit up, but no percentage appeared. He stared at his dad, willing him to have some small flicker of life the disc could work with. A percentage appeared. It moved slowly, but Owen let out a relieved sigh. If the disc showed a percentage, then the machines could repair someone. His dad had always been sure about that. Dad's body twitched as the machines entered his bloodstream and went to work, and the numbers started to go up. "Owen?" His mom was calling him. He could hear her clearly, just outside his window. He moved over to look out through the destroyed window and brushed some glass aside where it had landed on his bed. He looked out over the landscape, only it had changed again. The ship still hovered over the town in the distance, but there was another light. This time it came from Santa, standing out in front of his house holding his hands high. As he stood there again, Owen saw something different. Something terrifying, something powerful. "Owen, don't look!" his mom called out. He looked down and saw that she'd turned away, but he couldn't. Snow swirled and gathered around Santa, and the old elf threw his head back and let out a laugh that echoed down to the town below. Owen couldn't be sure, but he almost thought he saw the ship waver. Almost, but not quite. The snow glowed with a life of its own as it moved around Santa. It seemed to gleam, and clouds gathered overhead, blocking out the red and green dance of death from the humans and aliens fighting it out in orbit. Those clouds grew more intense, and they glowed with the same light that filled the snow and surrounded Santa. He held his spear out, then pointed it at the alien ship. The snowstorm unleashed, the clouds roiling, and it surrounded the alien ship. Owen held his breath as the explosion started. Small at first, but getting brighter and brighter as the glowing snow slammed into the ship and enveloped it, as entire chunks of it started to fall away onto the town below. Then slowly, impossibly, the ship listed to the side and fell. Though not on the town. No, those clouds and the impossibly bright snow, brighter even than that new star in the sky, pushed it away from the town where it landed and added its own fireball to the numerous other sources of lights that had nearly blinded Owen that night. Owen cheered. He couldn't help himself. Glowing snow roiled around streaks of light that tried to come in, and they turned into explosions. Santa looked up and put a finger to his nose again as he smiled and threw his head back. And in that moment he was ancient and terrible, and Owen felt sorry for any alien bastard who tried invading this planet. Ho, ho, ho! Someone coughed behind him. Owen turned and was surprised and elated to see his dad sitting up. He looked down at the disc on his thigh, and then to Owen. "What the hell is happening?" he asked. Owen threw his arms around his dad and squeezed. Tight. "Santa got me the most wonderful gift of all for Christmas," Owen whispered, tears coming to his eyes. "Aliens," his dad whispered, hugging Owen to him. "Goddamn aliens." A whine came to them from off in the distance, and Owen frowned. That sounded like anti-grav tech, but that bright light had knocked out the hover transports. He pulled away from his dad and ran over to the window again, wondering if more aliens were coming. Only what he saw in the distance made him whoop in. "Joy! TDF ships!" he shouted. "Yeah!" And sure enough, that's exactly what that whine was. TDF cruisers moving in over the landscape with a fighter escort moving out ahead of them, looking ready to end anything that came at them. Only they were too late. A massive TDF cruiser moved over the crashed alien ship. Lights pierced down, but there was nothing left for them to do. Nothing for them to shoot. Is that... Owen's dad had come up next to him, and he was looking down into what had been their front yard, though it was now littered with alien bodies. And as they watched, a glowing sleigh pulled by 8 massive reindeer flew down out of the sky and landed. Santa sprang to his sleigh, and to his team gave a whistle as he looked up to Owen. "This is only the beginning. I have a lot more to do tonight, but I'm only one man," Santa said. Owen frowned. This creature standing in the snow was lots of things, but he doubted he was a mere man. "But you're Santa," Owen said. "You can go around the world in one night." Santa threw his head back and laughed. "If only I could, but I'm not. Quite the present dispenser your parents would have you believe. I'll do what I can, though. You'll be a good boy, right, Owen?" Santa looked down at the pulse rifle lying in the snow, and Owen grinned as he realized what the jolly old elf meant. "The best," he shouted down. "I thought so," Santa said. "We'll make them regret the day they ever came to this world." Santa gave the reins a shake. The reindeer set off, powerful legs pulling them through the snow as they clawed into the air so Santa could join the fight already underway up in the heavens. But Owen heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight. "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good fight. Hope you liked this one. I've been kicking around a few ideas for short stories where aliens invade Earth, and oops, it turns out all the things that go bump in the night are still around and don't like having their planet invaded any more than humanity. I was going to start with a story about a werewolf, but then this hit me out of the blue with the holiday coming up. Enjoy next story. Humans called it Judgment Day. It was easy enough for our experts to figure that out. It didn't take the best xenolinguistics people we had to figure that one out, though that's who they put on the problem. They were easily able to track it down to a quaint ancient notion of the end of the world from human religious texts. Worlds ending were hardly anything new. The undefeated holy forces of the Emperor, may he live forever, had ended plenty of worlds. Still, there was a lot of laughing in the ranks when everyone realized the primitives were naming their attack after an account from an ancient religious book that would have been long since discredited as any sort of real authority in any non-backwater civilization. A lot of people said it was yet another sign they needed to be wiped off the face of the galaxy before they could spread their curious and dangerous notions too far. The last thing the galaxy needed was a bunch of fanatical religious primates barely down from the trees, evolutionarily speaking, leading a technological jihad through the rest of the civilized galaxy. I knew better, though. Not that anyone listened. I was just a lowly pilot trainee with an interest in human culture, after all. Something that already Madame suspect in the eyes of my peers and superiors. Something clanged down the hall. I paused in my launch pod, worried. It was coming for me. Judgment Day. I didn't think I was better than the best xenolinguistic experts in the Emperor's vast civilization, but I knew better. I could speak the human second language. A scream rang down from the hall. I looked at my launch indicator. It wouldn't be long now. I was so close. All I needed to do was... That scream quickly turned to a gargle, followed by a sick, wet noise and a crunch. I'd, studied the humans, of course. I did an exchange program with them before I enlisted in the Imperial Academy. My parents thought I was insane. Who would go and stay with the humans? What could a properly civilized beings ever hope to learn from a bunch of primitives? I'd simply told them to live long and prosper, thinking about how I was emulating one of my favorite Earth heroes by eschewing the Imperial Academy for a cycle and going to study with the humans instead. The decision had seemed logical then. I almost wish I hadn't done it now. Because now I knew what was coming for me. My scales turned a few different shades of purple at another loud sound, a pod launching. I watched the trajectory on my holo display that showed me the battle. It wasn't going well for the undefeated Imperial Navy. The thing about going around with a name like Undefeated was you needed to be able to back up a boast like that, and to be fair, the undefeated Imperial Navy had always come out on top, until now. The manned battle pod, a fancy word for high explosives piloted by a pilot trainee as a last resort. An ironic echo from human history that nobody appreciated when I brought it up, arced through space. For a moment, I thought it might actually go towards the humans. But no, it had the same trajectory as every other battle pod. At the last moment, it janked to the side, did a little fancy maneuvering that would be impossible for any living creature to pull off without being turned into jelly on the bulkhead and slammed into an undefeated Imperial Navy ship. That ship was looking pretty defeated and full of holes now. Sort of like that Swiss cheese delicacy the humans introduced me to while I studied on their world. The humans had been so kind and welcoming. Not at all like the primitive monkeys I'd been told to expect. They had a rich culture, I'd discovered. Fanciful movies and ideas that were far beyond anything their species was actually capable of when they made those entertainments. I'd developed a pet theory that it was their capacity for imagination that in large part had resulted in their surprisingly rapid rise to the galactic stage. Another clang rang out, closer now. The things were close enough that I could make out the mumble of a conversation, even if I couldn't make out actual words. The mumbled conversation quickly turned to screams. A plasma blaster rang out, and then there was silence. A Pod 2 down from mine launched, but I didn't think it was an Imperial trainee pilot on there looking to render one last service to the Emperor with their death. The ship arced through space again, only to turn and slam into the carrier, sending a shudder running through the bulkhead all around me. That definitely hadn't been one of our own piloting the thing. I'd learned a lot about the humans while I was on their world. They could be the kindest and most welcoming creatures I knew, but there was also a capacity for something else in them. That was what had me so ill at ease when the Imperial Navy announced the preemptive attack against some of the outlying human colony worlds that were getting too close to Imperial space. Not in Imperial space, mind you, but close enough that the Emperor, who probably wasn't going to live forever given the way the current conflict was going, wanted to send a message. The message had been received, all right. Loud and clear, as my human companion said. It brought to mind an apocryphal quote from one of their ancient admirals. The very one who started the conflict that ended with them flinging raw trainees strapped to primitive flying machines that were barely a couple of wings and some high explosives at their enemies in a desperate bid to stave off ultimate defeat. Something about waking, sleeping giants and filling them with a terrible resolve. This time the loud clang came on my blast door. I turned and looked at the thing in fear. Judgment Day. It had come for me at last. I reached over and hit a button to open the door. I knew there was no point fighting what was out there. The human's ultimate weapon. Something ripped out of the nightmares of an ancient movie my fellow students showed me late one night. The thing had been laughably primitive, even by the standards of what they considered special effects in their movies. And yet that ancient entertainment from before the Earth governments consolidated had held me, transfixed, until it was over. The door swished open, and the creature staring back at me was both terrifying and impressive. It looked like the propaganda ideal of a sailor in the Imperial Navy that actual sailors in the Imperial Navy never quite lived up to. Another one moving behind it, no doubt on its way to the pod next to mine, both totally naked. Both were tall, broad-shouldered, and they had a little too much muscle for a pilot. They had a little too much muscle for anyone in the Imperial forces, for that matter. Even the grunts tasked with security and doing crazy things like flying down to a planet to pacify hot zones who always had more muscle than brains. Supposedly, the star of the human movie had originally risen to fame by making his muscles bigger. Of all things, though, to hear the humans reverently speak of his memory, he also had charisma and intelligence to go with the muscles. A funny species, the humans. The thing stepped in, looking me over in the small cockpit. It held a hand out. I need your uniform, your boots, and your battle pod. I stared up at the thing. It really was a creature out of nightmares. I knew I should have just given it the codes to the battle pod. I thought about the wet sounds I'd heard, the plasma blasts. I looked at the line of the naked creatures moving through the ship behind the one accosting me, each and every one of them in search of clothes and keys. It was ridiculous. If the humans could make creatures like this, then they didn't need to go to the extra trouble of giving them a fleshy exterior. They could have just sent the battle-hardened endoskeletons I knew were underneath. But that wasn't the human style. No, they were sending a message and having some fun as they killed us. The magnificent bastards. And so the next line came to my lips without thinking. I'd discovered the humans used their popular culture as a second language, and reflexively quoting movies was second nature to me after my stint on Earth. You forgot to say please. The creature paused. It cocked its head to the side and seemed to regard me with new eyes. New glowing red eyes, I might add, though that red glow appeared and disappeared in flash. You are a friend to humanity? The thing asked, its impassive face taking in the cramped battle pod cockpit. That look seemed to say that it doubted a friend of humanity would be strapped to a bunch of high explosives meant to destroy the invading human fleet, but it never gave away any emotion despite communicating that incredulity. It never would give away any emotion. I knew this thing couldn't be bargained with. It couldn't be reasoned with. It didn't feel pity or remorse or fear. The humans could, though, and they programmed this thing. All I could do was hope that was enough to save me. It wouldn't be enough to save the undefeated Imperial Navy, that was for sure. I studied on Earth for a couple of semesters, I said. I'm a fan of the culture. I didn't want any of this to happen, but it's not like anyone listened to a low-rank pilot trainee when they decided to glass those colony worlds. The thing paused again. It seemed to be thinking, and something rose inside me for the first time since this whole mess started. Something I hadn't thought I'd ever feel again. Hope. Finally, it took a step forward and hit a button to close the cockpit. Then it held a hand out to me. Come with me if you want to live. Author's note. I was watching T2 last week in honor of the 30th anniversary. God, that makes me feel old typing that out. And this story popped into my head. It's short and silly, but I hope you liked it. Enjoy next story. God farts? Secondary. Translation specialist Colv cringed under Fleet Admiral Tolwyn's gaze. He'd checked and rechecked multiple times, but the translation was what it was. Colv drew himself up and squared his whiskers. That is so, Exalted Admiral, he said, somehow finding his voice despite the terror of the moment. The Admiral turned back to the hollow block in the center of the CIC. His own whiskers bristled as he watched the constellation of Terran ships coming for them. Kolv didn't feel much worry as he looked at that constellation. The humans had tried time and again to defeat the ever-victorious fleet, and he took comfort in knowing that a fleet didn't get a name like ever-victorious by having ships blasted out from under them. The idea of the fleet admirals' ire was far more terrifying than whatever the primitives were throwing at them to save their system from resource harvesting. No matter, they're going to get the same response they always do, the fleet admiral said. It took Kolv a moment to realize the fleet admiral was looking down at him. The admiral's tail quivered with barely contained joy, a stark counterpoint to the way Kolv's own tail quivered with barely contained anxiety. The admiral wanted a response. His mouth worked. "I suppose so, exalted admiral." Kolv finally managed to hiss out. "Exactly so," the admiral said, his tail escaping his rigid control for a moment and twitching in anticipation of the battle to come. "Electronic warfare, are you prepared?" "We are, exalted admiral," a senior electronic warfare technician said from the other end of the CIC. "This is your first time in the CIC for one of these, isn't it?" the fleet admiral asked. Again, it took a moment for Kolv to realize the fleet admiral was talking to him. "That is so, exalted admiral," he said. "I imagine senior translation specialist Vesot hit the nip a little too hard last night," the admiral asked, again his tail quivering in barely contained amusement. "I would not know, exalted admiral," Kolv said, trying to keep his own tail from betraying him. He damn well knew why he was here in the CIC at such a critical moment, and it had everything to do with Vesot not being able to keep away from the strange herb they'd discovered on the Terran homeworld before the last invasion was pushed off-world by the determined hairless apes who presumed to act like they still owned the place. "The package is ready to be delivered," the senior electronic warfare technician said after a moment. "Do the honors, senior technician," the admiral said. "Show them what it means to send their primitive adding machines against the ever-victorious fleet." "It shall be so, exalted admiral," the technician said. Her claws danced across her control board, but there was no obvious change all around them. Though Kolv had heard all about this, the Terrans tended towards primitive in everything from the way they organized their society by warring tribes, albeit tribes that sometimes spanned continents, to their information technology. It was standard operating procedure. The ever-victorious fleet had discovered thousands of rotations ago that it was often easier to attack the computers running primitive ships and then go in and mop up an enemy who couldn't fire back at their leisure. Sporting? Not exactly, but no one was ever victorious if they only ever went into a fair fight. This was the first time Kolv had seen it happen personally. Sure, he'd seen the recordings of the first Terran fleet that had been easily disabled and destroyed. Sure, he'd watched the destruction of the last Terran missile swarm they hurled out to the gas giant they orbited to begin resource harvesting, but that hadn't been the same. There wasn't the same delicious tension and anticipation as in the CIC. "God farts," the fleet admiral said, his tail twitching in amusement. "I know the Terrans have an odd sense of humor, but why call those missiles God farts? Why try to threaten us with them like they're any different from the last missile swarm?" Kolv straightened his whiskers. This was the third time the admiral had addressed him, and he was almost used to it by now. His claws danced across his own screen as he brought up the information that led him to this very odd translation. "It is an odd turn of phrase, exalted admiral," Kolv said. "It comes from one of their island nations, the one that was a major belligerent in the last global conflict our probes monitored." "Ah, the island with the giant radioactive lizard?" the fleet admiral asked. "Our specialists never were able to figure out where that thing was hiding during the last invasion, for all that it never emerged to challenge us." "The very same, exalted admiral," Kolv said. A ping on his screen drew Kolv's attention. A message from Vesot. His claw hovered to answer it, hesitating because he really didn't want to talk to Vesot at that moment, but blessedly his CIC duties pulled him away from dealing with his hungover superior, though he wasn't sure it was a blessing once he gave more than one ear to the conversation. "Why haven't they stopped?" the fleet admiral asked, stepping up to the holographic display. He swiped a claw, and the display magnified in on one of the god farts. It was a simple thing, no more than a nuclear warhead in front, a fusion reactor on the back, and not much else. I'm sending the package again, Exalted Admiral, the technician said. It's possible they've tried to harden their systems against outside interference. They can try, the Admiral said, though his tail didn't quiver with amusement anymore. No, it stood straight up and stock still. There's something about these craft that seems different from the last nuclear missile swarm they sent at us. Running a new deep scan on them, Exalted Admiral, a technician said from somewhere, though Kolv didn't catch who said it. No. His attention was on the close-up of that primitive craft and the wider display behind it that showed thousands of them heading for the ever-victorious fleet. They were primitive, but somehow seeing the thing up close gave it a threatening and malevolent feel. Kolv imagined that was the sort of feeling he might get if someone tried to kill him with a sharp rock. Primitive, yes, but more than capable of landing a death blow in the hands of a skilled primitive. A ripple ran down his fur as he tried to concentrate on his duties. The package has been delivered. Exalted Admiral. Again, the technician said. Very good, the Admiral said, his tail still stock still. Another ping pulled Kolv attention away from the holoblock and back to his own station. It was a request for a video chat this time. Kolv let out a low growl. It would seem that Vesod had finally stumbled out of his addled stupor to do some work, and that important work couldn't wait until after they were under attack. Another ripple ran down his fur. Why would he think they were under threat? The ever-victorious fleet didn't need to worry about nuclear weapons that were like something out of their own species' dark ages. Kolv didn't want to take the call, but Vesot was his superior. He swiped a claw, and the audio went to his ear. Implants even as Vesot's haggard face appeared on the screen in front of him. There was something about that look that gave Kolv pause. Sure, Vesot looked about like he always did when he'd been too far into the catnip, but there was something else there. A light of fear barely suppressed in his eyes and his twitching tail. Have you warned the Exalted Admiral? Vesot asked. Warned him? Kolv asked, his own tail twitching in irritation. Apologies, Senior Specialist, but I don't understand. The attack, Vesot said, not bothering with the usual courtesies. Did you warn him about the attack? Again, I do not understand, Kolv said, dispensing with his own courtesies. The low growl carried through to his ear implants, and his hair stood on end. That wasn't the sort of growl that came from a little insubordination. That was the kind of growl that said there was a mortal threat near. Kolv knew he was missing something here. Exalted Admiral, they do not appear to be slowing down, someone said. Deep scans completed. They are similar to previous computer-guided missiles we've encountered, but we're picking up a single Terran life sign on each godfart, yet another said. Attempting to send the package to the godfarts a third time, the electronic warfare technician said. What are they calling those things? Godfarts? Vesot spat. Where did you come up with that? My apologies, Senior Specialist, but it was my best translation based on the context. I'm not as familiar with languages outside the big three as you are, but I've done my best, Kolv said. Vesot let out a low moan. Kolv, you've killed us all! The godfarts are making contact with outer elements of the fleet. Exalted. Admiral? Someone called out, their voice tense. As well it should be. Kolv turned to look at the holoblock, his tail twitching as he watched some of the small Terran missiles destroyed by close-in weapon systems, but more of them got through, and it only took a few getting through to cause a bloom of light and death. A Terran is flying each of those godfarts, you say? The fleet admiral asked. Aye, Exalted Admiral. Vesot's own translation notes flowed across Kolv's screen with historical context that made his tail quiver in terror, even as the contents of his bowels turned to jelly. Why would they do that? It's suicide, Kolv hissed at his screen, and suddenly all eyes in the CIC were on him as more Terran ships slammed into the ever-victorious fleet and converted it into irradiated wreckage floating above an angry red storm the size of planets. Those Terran ships couldn't be turned away by electronic warfare trickery because the computer controlling them was a crazed Terran using mechanical controls who wanted to kill more than they wanted to live. You got the translation all wrong? Kolv? Vesot said as the ship's close-in weapon systems sent a staccato hammering ringing through the hull. Those aren't godfarts out there. The humans are sending their divine wind. Author's note: I've been reading the magnificent Mitcher about the carrier war in the Pacific, and this idea came to me. It's always fun to do a short HFY palette cleanser in between longer stuff. Hope you liked it. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.